Meritocracy, Sol pointed out, uh, implies that the testing regime is a comment on your worth as an individual, your moral worth, which it's really not. If I do better on the SAT than you, that doesn't mean I'm a better person all around. All it means is that I'm better at the tasks associated with this SAT, which predict that I'm probably going to do better than you at a university on almost any subject. I'm going to do better than you at law school, and I'm probably going to do better on the LSAT. It means that in the subset of life that has to do with intellectual tasks, problem solving, quick learning, model building, I'm better at that than you, right? That doesn't mean I'm a better person than you, okay? It doesn't mean
That's technically true, because if you look at the personality attributes, the 2 or 3 that you would most associate, let's say, with morality, like it's tricky, and there's not a one-to-one relationship, and I'm not implying that. But generally speaking, people regard those who are conscientious, diligent, hardworking, reliable, industrious as moral. Now, that's not the only dimension of morality, because you also have agreeableness, more people who are more agreeable in our society, at least, are also deemed more moral because they're more caring, they're more empathic, they're more polite. And so you could even see conscientiousness as the conservative virtue and agreeableness as the liberal virtue, if you wanted to. It doesn't matter. Those are the places where virtue seems to be captured to some degree in the personality models. There's zero correlation with IQ, like zero.
Interesting.
Right. So technically, yeah. Well, and so another way, and it's very important, the case that you're making to discriminate intellectual capacity, let's say, or merit from moral worth, because it's also the case that the intelligent have their temptation, right? The evil figures of mythology are always stellar intellects gone spectacularly wrong. That's why it's always the evil scientist in the modern mythologies, right? All the enemies of the superheroes are evil scientists. They're all evil geniuses. And that's because, to your point, general cognitive ability is not only not associated with morality per se, it's worse than that in a sense, I think, Coleman, because it is definitely the case that higher general cognitive ability confers upon you a tremendous advantage in a complex society, because you can learn faster, and the differences are not trivial. It's the biggest single difference between people is general cognitive ability. And it's an appalling literature to familiarize yourself with to some degree, because it does seem to violate the principles on first glance of universal cosmic justice. It's like, why is it fair for some people to be born with an IQ of 85, which barely makes you competent even to be a member of the armed forces, regardless of what role you're in, or to have an IQ of 145, which opens the doors, let's say, to places like Harvard and investment banking as a career strategy. And the cards are dealt out in a relatively arbitrary way. Well, that's a very bitter pill to swallow. But it is also the case that those who are intelligent have the temptation of Lucifer, essentially, if you think about it mythologically, because it's very easy to worship your own intellect and then to worship intellect per se. And that's a very, very dangerous thing to do, to develop that sense of wounded intellectual pride if people aren't bowing at your feet, or even the presumption that merely because you've been gifted with intelligence, because it's not something you earn, you've been gifted with intelligence, that means that you're of stellar moral character. That's simply no. I was really shocked in my clinical practice, with this quite regularly, because I had some people in my practice who were definitely in the lower quintile of intelligence, let's say, very, very impaired, unable to read, certainly unable to use a computer, virtually unemployable, regardless of how much effort was poured into that. Yet often unbelievably admirable in their ability to bear up under the complex and stressful conditions of their life without being bitter or resentful, while still being of service to other people. It was really shocking to me to watch that. and a reminder that just because you're intelligent doesn't mean you're good. And we do in our culture, and the leftists are particularly egregious in this regard, I would say, to casually elude general cognitive ability with moral worth. If you have a materialist viewpoint, that's a very easy thing to do. It's a very easy thing to do. It's a hard thing to fight against.
Yeah.
But it's a pernicious problem.
I have a question for you. You said, and I think it's right, and I feel it too, that observing the vast difference between the intellectual skills people are born with is a bitter pill to swallow. And that the more you learn about it, the more you despair at the unfairness of the universe in some way. I'm curious, do you think that I share that reaction? Do you think that reaction is a natural consequence of learning about that? Or do you think it's only because we have some deep Western background assumptions about fairness? Like, do you think that would strike a pre-Western tribe as unfair as well as a bitter pill to swallow? Or do you think it's really a function of some deep kind of assumptions we have?
Well, okay. Well, I think there's a couple of things going on there. The first is that our society does differentially award people with high general cognitive ability because our society is very complex and rapidly changing. And so in a traditional society where roles remain unchanged for generations, IQ is much less relevant. But in our society, because look, how fast do you have to be to stay among those who aren't at least 5 years behind the computational revolution? Like, you have to have an IQ of 95th percentile to be anywhere near the bleeding edge? Because things are changing so quickly. So we differentially devote resources to the cognitively skilled, and our culture is set up so that that's more and more the case. But then there's another issue too that I think is equally relevant. You see, the worship of the intellect in and of itself has this danger of pride that's associated with it. And it's a very big danger. So the way we should be conceptualizing intelligence is the manner in which gifts are portrayed in the gospel accounts, for example. So one of the things, Christ says two things that are in some ways contradictory. One of them is that to those who have everything, more will be given. And from those who have nothing, everything will be taken. Okay, so that's the Matthew principle. That's what the economists call it. And it is a pointer to the fact that resources accrue, regardless of the discipline, resources accrue in the hands of a few. Doesn't matter what the discipline is. And that's what Marx observed when he said that capital would accrue in the hands of fewer and fewer people. Now, that's true. It happens all the time. It happens in every society. And it doesn't matter whether it's a capitalist society or a socialist society, by the way. And so he attributed that to capitalism, which meant he misdiagnosed the problem because it's way deeper than capitalism. But it is the case that rewards are differentially distributed. Okay. And that those in the higher echelons of the cognitive distribution are more likely to accrue those rewards. But there's another statement there that's also relevant, which is that to those who have been given much, much will be required. And so this is a very useful thing to know. So like I had clients in my clinical practice who were very creative. Now that's also an innate proclivity. So creative people, they have a wide ideational space. So one idea is likely for them to remind them of many other ideas and many distal ideas, and they tend to be rapid at generating such ideas. And that's probably something as fundamentally biological as threshold for co-activation of adjoining neurons, right? It's that low level. Okay, now, so let's say you're gifted with creativity. Now, let's say that you don't exercise that responsibly. You don't pursue your creative mission. It turns into your enemy. Like a gift that you misuse turns into your enemy. And this is more to the justice elements. Like you might be rewarded, like your IQ is stellar. You wouldn't have accomplished what you've accomplished so far had that not been the case, and you've been successful in multiple different enterprises. And so, thank your lucky stars. Okay, does that make you privileged? Absolutely. Does it make you unfairly privileged? It depends on what you do with it. Like if you bore a responsibility that was commensurate with the talent, then you paid existentially for your gift. And the warning, the classical warning in deep religious texts is that if you misuse a gift that you've been granted, it will become an unbearable burden and turn itself against you. And like I had plenty of people in my clinical practice who were, they call them, let's say, underachievers. IQ of 140 and a 20th percentile social class position. That's a recipe for extreme bitterness. Many of the people who I had in my practice who were like that were unbelievably annoyed that the world hadn't bent itself over to bow at their feet because of their undeniable intellect. And God, the internet is crowded with people like that. I mean, what's that sitcom about the physicists, The Big Bang Theory? All the humor that went along with the Big Bang Theory was essentially at the expense of arrogant but socially dysfunctional intellectuals. So there is a justice. This is what I'm pointing to. Independent of the relationship between your intelligence and your social positioning, which looks unjust as hell, there's another form of justice in operation, which is if you're smart, you better learn to be humble, and you better learn to be grateful for the fact that you've been gifted, and you better take that on as a serious responsibility, like a serious moral responsibility. Because if you don't, it will work against you. And if you're super smart and your intellect is working against you, you are in serious trouble.